Welcome to the Department of Labor and Industry Employment Standards Division's presentation on prevailing wage basics for letting agencies. The objective of the video training is to assist letting agencies in identifying key elements about public works projects and their related obligations. By providing this training, we aim to educate letting agencies on how they need to handle applicable public works projects and why it is important that they are familiar with prevailing wage law. These outcomes include ensuring that the correct information is included in public bid information and contracts, which are subject to prevailing wage, and how to determine the correct information to include. What is a public works contract? Section 18-2-401, subsection 11A, Montana Code Annotated, MCA, defines a public works contract to mean a contract for construction services let by the state, county, municipality, school district, or political subdivision, in which the total cost of the contract is in excess of $25,000. Or for non-construction services let by the state, county, municipality, or political subdivision in which the total cost of the contract is in excess of $25,000. The non-construction services classification does not apply to any school district that at any time prior to April 27, 1999, contracted with a private contractor for the provision of non-construction services on behalf of the district. The term public works contract does not include contracts entered into by the Department of Public Health and Human Services for the provision of human services under Section 18-2-401, subsection 11B, MCA. This may include things such as Medicaid providers, nursing homes, public health offices, group homes, personal care attendants, Meals on Wheels, transportation programs, and child care providers. Montana Department of Labor and Industry does not have jurisdiction over federal Davis-Bacon projects. If a project or contract falls under both federal and state jurisdiction, the federal wage determinations must be taken into consideration, and the higher of the wages apply. Hunter v. City of Bozeman, Montana, 1985. If a property will ultimately be owned, maintained by, or the responsibility of a public agency, the project may also meet the definition of a public works project. Public contracting agencies shall not divide a public works project into more than one contract for the purpose of avoiding compliance per Administrative Rule of Montana, ARM 24.17.161. Administrative Rule of Montana, ARM 24.17.514. Commercial suppliers are not subject to prevailing wage. A commercial supplier of goods and supplies is not subject to Montana's prevailing wage laws unless that supplier acts as a construction contractor, subcontractor, or employer on the public works contract by performing on-site labor. Employees of a commercial supplier who are engaged in the performance of services directly upon the job site must be paid the applicable prevailing wage rate for the classification of work performed. Additional examples can be found in the Administrative Rule. Letting projects for public bid. Projects slated for $150,000 or more are required to be publicly advertised for bid for 3 consecutive weeks, calling for sealed bids to perform the work, and stating the time and place bids will be considered. Notice may include electronic notification, publication in newspapers of general circulation, or other appropriate means. Beginning July 1st, 2028, and every 5 years after that, the threshold requiring public notice will be adjusted for inflation. During the competitive bidding process, no work may be done. If responsible bids are not received after 2 attempts, the department or agency may contract the work in a manner determined to be cost-effective for the state. The public notice and competitive bidding requirements do not apply to work done by inmates at an institution in the Department of Corrections or in certain circumstances for buildings and resources at Bannock. Please see Section 18-2-301 MCA for additional information. Information required in bid specifications and contracts. Administrative Rule of Montana 24.17.144. Every public works project requires an unequivocal agreement by the contractor or employer that a worker performing labor on the project will be paid the applicable standard prevailing rate of wages. A listing of the required prevailing wage rates must be included in the bid document and contract. It must be specific which rate schedule and year. If work is to be performed in more than one district, the highest of the rates is to be included. Wage rates adjustments for multi-year contracts. A 3% increase every 12 months is required for projects over 30 months. While it is the responsibility of the letting agency to include this provision in their bid documents and contracts, it is the sole responsibility of the contractor and subcontractors to provide increases, not the contracting agency. 18-2-417 MCA. Requirement for contractor to maintain records for 3 years after the contractor's or employer's completion of work on the project. The department performs compliance reviews on prevailing wage projects. 18-2-422 MCA. Now let's look deeper into the requirements for construction versus non-construction projects. Construction contracts. The following requirements must be included in the bid specifications and/or public works contracts. Requirement for at least 50% of all workers on construction projects performing labor under the contract be bona fide Montana residents. 18-2-403 MCA. This requirement does not apply to projects with federal funds where residency preference laws are specifically prohibited by federal law, federal DOT contracts. MCA 18-2-409. ARM 24.17.147. A bona fide Montana resident is defined as an individual who, at the time of employment and immediately prior to the time of employment, has lived in the state in a manner and for a time that is sufficient to clearly justify the conclusion that the individual's past habitation in this state has been coupled with an intention to make this state the individual's home. 18-2-401, subsection 1, MCA. It is a requirement for contractors or subcontractors to pay employees receiving an hourly wage on a weekly basis. 18-2-423, MCA. It is a requirement for rate schedules to be posted in a conspicuous place at the job site. 18-2-422, subsection 3, MCA. In the event a project may fall under more than one category of construction project, contracting agencies will determine, based on the preponderance of labor hours to be worked, which rate schedule is appropriate. Only one Montana rate schedule can be included in a bid advertisement, request for proposal, or contract. 18-2-418 MCA. Non-construction contracts. The following requirements must be included in the bid specifications and public works contracts. 18-2-403, subsection 1, MCA requires that contracts include statements mandating the contractor give preference to the employment of bona fide Montana residents and the performance of the work. A pay period may not be of any duration longer than semi-monthly. 29 CFR 4.6, subsection H. Determining applicable rates schedule. Applicable rates are those in effect at the time the bid specifications are advertised. If a project is let for bid in December 2024, but closes in January 2025 and is scheduled to begin in May of 2025, the 2024 rates are still the required rates for the contract. ARM 24.17.127, subsection 1C. Current and archived rate schedules can be found on the Employment Standards Division's website. General rule for determining the appropriate construction rate schedule is if you walk into it, it's probably building construction. If you drive on it, it's probably highway construction. And if it doesn't fit either of those, it's probably heavy construction. If you are unsure, please review the definitions in the Administrative Rules of Montana 24.17.501 and/or reach out to the Department of Labor and Industry for assistance. Non-construction services. These contracts for services such as food service, janitorial, maintenance, groundskeeping, or security for public facilities such as rest stops, prisons, universities, military complexes, etc. 18-2-401, subsection 9A through 9L, MCA. Why this information is important to letting agencies. Failure to include the required information in bid documents or contracts for public works projects relieves the contractors and subcontractors of responsibility to pay prevailing wage rates and places the obligation on the public contracting agency, 18-2-403, subsection 9, MCA. The public agency can also be held liable for applicable penalties of 20% of unpaid wages found due, $25 per day per underpaid worker, and any additional legal fees and costs. Once the project is completed. Whenever a public works project over $50,000 is accepted as completed by a public contracting agency, the agency shall promptly send to the department a notice of acceptance and the completion date of the project, 18-2-421 MCA. There will always be unique situations. If you have questions and/or concerns, please reach out to us at 406-444-6543 or email at dlierdwage@mt.gov. There are additional informational videos at the link at the bottom of this screen.